Hello there guys, Daniel Childs back here again. Let's talk Chelsea for Thursday. We are nearly at the weekend, so nearly the return of Premier League football, and I have to say, given what's taken place this week, it's quite nice to have some football back. Hopefully a good Chelsea performance on Saturday. So I'll be doing my team selector tomorrow as we look forward to that game as the Premier League returns. But today we're going to be talking about two different Fofanas in Chelsea's squad. One who has caused a few ripples with some comments that have been released during the international break around his Chelsea future, and the other is kind of in limbo and I think represents a problem of this bomb squad, or a problem of Chelsea having too many players and not knowing what to do with them, and what does that mean for some of these players and the collateral damage that could follow. And also a massive story around the stadium, or at least what has gone on with the stadium, and kind of why it feels like we're consistently in this loop, this Groundhog Day cycle of a story gets released about some form of development or seeming progress about a new stadium or redevelopment of Stamford Bridge, and then it's quickly cut off and we're back in the deadlock. I'll explain that. So please do like, subscribe, all of that good stuff. Let's just start with Wesley Fofana. So naturally, this is the sort of stuff that's usual for an international break that causes, you know, discussion over an international break. This was a very old school story in the sense of a player not going on international duty, but giving some quotes during the international break that kind of causes some concern, and then everyone forgets about it in a couple of weeks. So Fofana has basically talked about a potential move he could have made to Marseille, his boyhood club, the club he loves, over this past summer. This is what he had to say. So let's go through his quotes and then maybe why some people have been a little bit upset about it. So he said, "I'd be lying if I said I didn't weigh out Marseille's summer offer. It touched me and I think everyone knows why I support them. I thought about it, but the current objective is to succeed at Chelsea. I still have a contract until 2029 and we'll see after that. I have never hidden it. Marseille is my city, my club. We'll see if I end up being at Marseille in a few years or if I stay at Chelsea for the rest of my career." So I know why people don't like these sort of comments. I've said this consistently on the show, and maybe this is just like one of those things I've come to accept, because if you attach yourself too closely to players, especially ones who don't come from the academy per se, but even then, you know, as we've seen this summer, those players can leave. So, you know, if you're going to be supporting a football club, you have to come to terms that players are going to move on. It's just natural. Even if there are some I don't like moving on, you move on. You have to. But in the case of like Fofana, right, the fact that he has prior connections, has clubs that he likes, Marseille, his city, his club, you know, dreams of playing for them maybe one day. That doesn't mean it's the end of the world. That doesn't mean this player is a trade site, is someone that you need to turn on. It's just kind of natural, right? Like I don't see the need for this to be a massive outrage. I don't think in the context of Chelsea's current timeline or era, it's great. It's not great to hear a player who hasn't actually done that much for Chelsea already kind of think about leaving, him saying that publicly. But, you know, he is being at least honest, which I think some people want players to be honest. And then I think sometimes maybe some people are a little bit hypocritical in the sense that they don't want actually footballers to be honest, because the moment they are honest, no, they just want people to go take them back to the PR line, say how Chelsea are wonderful. But listen, Fofana has still a lot to do at Chelsea. I think there's still a lot to discover about Fofana. There are still a lot of questions around him. Will he stay fit for the majority of this season? I still think there is a very big and potentially vital defender for Chelsea. It's nice to see that him and Levi are kind of already forming a partnership. It may be going under the radar. I've actually got a show I want to do soon about Levi Colwill, and seeing how he's impacting Maresca's style of play. Obviously, other events have taken a sort of priority this week for obvious reasons, but hopefully I'll be able to post that next week. But in the sense of Fofana, I think obviously he's a big part of that sort of chemistry and relationship with Colwill, and hopefully for him he can really develop, because I think at his best he's got great mobility. I think he's got good decision making, good timing with his tackles, and I think on the ball too he can prove to be a real threat as well. I find it a little bit weird he's being sort of forced out wide to kind of a right back position. I'm not entirely sure that's best for him. But we know he can maraud up and down the field. I think that was one of the big selling points of signing him back in, when was it, 2022? It feels like a long time ago now, given Chelsea history. But, you know, I think for him, let's hope he improves. And I don't think these quotes, especially from Marseille, like that's the thing that I think should make you feel that it's not the end of the world. He isn't saying, I always wanted to play for Liverpool. I always wanted to play for Real Madrid. He wants to play for a club who, respectfully to Marseille and their history, you know, this isn't one of the elite European clubs who are going to be competing for Premier League and Champions League titles, right? Like, it isn't a domestic rival. It isn't a European rival. And maybe at the end of his career, he's maybe thinking, I may go there when I'm wrapping up my career. So there we go. Let's hope Fofana can put on a good performance and move past it. The other Fofana, I think, is kind of more serious and actually something that is kind of more worthy of attention. And it is, of course, David Datro Fofana. He was supposed to be going to Athens, AEK Athens, but that deal was off in the last minute. Of course, the other transfer deadline day was passed over the weekend and over the beginning of this week. Last minute doubts on the deal apparently were due to the Athens side basically requesting that terms were changed after a verbal agreement was struck, and the deal then hung in the balance. It didn't go through, and as we've seen before, this leaves players in a massive limbo. And unfortunately for Fofana, it doesn't leave him like with the Osimhen situation when his potential move to Chelsea fell through. Then he had the backup, as other players have, of these other international deadlines going a little bit further, so maybe you could get a move. This is a really sad situation because we bought Fofana in January of 2023. I think it was one of the very first signings. It might have been the first signing of Winstanley, especially Winstanley and Stewart. Winstanley was definitely in place, I think, of that January 23 window. And at the time, I think there was intrigue because this is a guy at Mould where obviously Erling Haaland had come from that was attracting attention and maybe could be that kind of hidden gem that Chelsea sign and develops into a really good player. He came in, barely played at all. I distinctly remember him coming off the bench in that dreadful FA Cup defeat to Man City. Didn't have a lot of hope in that dreadful season, and then gets his loan move to Union Berlin. On paper, a really good loan move, I felt, but of course it didn't go well for him at all. Union had a really difficult start to last season, sacked their head coach. He had a falling out with the head coach. He returns to Chelsea, but he gets a loan move to Burnley. At the time, I thought maybe the Championship could be better for him, but he proved me wrong. I thought he had a really good second half of the season. Again, not a great environment for him, but he scored a couple of goals. And in the context of Burnley last season, who were rightly relegated, you know, not a good team, he did okay. So then he comes back to Chelsea, and to me with Fofana, I think he represents, there's a batch of these players, right? And some of them have already been sold, some of them have been loaned. It feels to me like a batch of players that this new ownership has already forgotten they actually signed. And it's, I think, the collateral damage of it, that you can have a lot of young promising careers who are going to be hurt and affected by this. And it gets back to kind of a key point I continue to make. I'm not entirely sure all of this business is about constructing a great football team and about these youth products coming into the first team. Because a player like Fofana, if he just stayed at Mould or actually gone somewhere else, like I know Brighton were in for him at the time, I think he'd be in a better place right now. And I hate saying that because I'd like to think that players coming to Chelsea is best for their careers. But you can't honestly say that when you look at stories like this, where a player now is left in limbo. Now, I'd like to think he could be reintegrated, but he isn't going to be in the Conference League squad, at least for the first half of the season, because he was never put in that. I'm not sure in terms of him being reintegrated into kind of the main Chelsea first team squad and playing any sort of football between now and Christmas, where he's going to have to wait till January potentially to get a move away. I feel like this is a story that continues to repeat, and you know, the excuse that gets given about this kind of massive stockpiling constantly is that effectively it's all about making profit, and you know, the profit is going to come eventually, and you don't have to worry about these players, they'll be sold on. As we've seen in the past few weeks, that hasn't been the case. Chelsea have massively failed to get players they've deemed unworthy, unsuitable, not part of the first team, not part of Maresca's plans. Getting them out the door has been a massive failure. We've basically paid Arsenal to take Raheem Sterling. Trevor Chalobah wasn't sold. He was loaned to Crystal Palace, I think, weakening our defence. Ben Chilwell is still here. What's going to happen with him? We've seen Conor Chukwuemeka had to be reintegrated into the first team as well. Will we see other examples like this? It kind of sums this up, and next summer we're going to have Esteval and Kendry Pires arriving. What's the knock-on effect, not only for those players, could they be in that type of situation, which feels wild given the way they're being projected as. But I mean, given where Fofana was a couple of years ago, I mean, it's concerning. It really is. So I think this is a sad state. And actually, it's not like Fofana you can make a firm judgment whether he's good or not for Chelsea, because he hasn't had a run in the team. And actually, the very, very few brief, even cameo appearances, there's been actually signs that maybe he could provide something to Chelsea. He just seemed to be not good enough, so he's going to have to wait, and I don't think it's a great situation. Let's, for the rest of this show, talk about the stadium. Now, it was quite comical, wasn't it? I believe it was on Tuesday when we got this story in the afternoon that Chelsea were having talks about Earls Court, and they were in talks to move to Earls Court, and literally within hours, I mean, it felt like 2 hours later, not only Earls Court Development Company, but then it was kind of reported as well, they released a statement on their X account. There is no plan for Chelsea to relocate to the Earls Court site. We are prioritising the development of thousands of homes, jobs, culture and open space from 2026 for a master plan which has evolved over 4 years of engagement. There is no football stadium within the master plan. Now, you're not having deja vu, you're not living through Groundhog Day. This has happened before. I think it was in the spring of 23. We had a very similar series of events where briefing came out about potential Earls Court, and very quickly the same development company came out and said that ain't happening. So this has happened numerous times, and Nazar Kinsella pointed, of course he's working for BBC, but he pointed back to an article he wrote in April that the rebuild, actually, whatever rebuild, whether it's Stamford Bridge or elsewhere, cannot start until 2027. Chelsea will not take possession of this site until 2027, giving an opportunity for residents to be rehoused during a leaseback period. So there's obviously some time between now and then. But then also on top of that, why are we in this stalemate? It's not only because of obviously the chaos and the friction in the boardroom at Chelsea between Bowley and Clearlake. That on itself is an issue. But the problem we've got is, where would Chelsea move? Is there anything to do with Earls Court? Is there any manoeuvre there? Publicly, they're saying no, but you never know. Chelsea may have been in talks with them. How do you redevelop Stamford Bridge? All the headache and the concern of what happens to Chelsea in the meantime, where Chelsea would have to move to, with a load of fans wanting to, of course, watch Chelsea in that time. How long that's going to take? It's been drafted up that it would take a lot longer than, say, when Spurs had to move briefly to Wembley. So this is has been a headache for a very long period of time because of the unique nature of Stamford Bridge, where it's located in London. There's the development side of it, but there also is the CPO side of it. I'm a CPO shareholder. I would probably and would be voting in any kind of major act in this capacity, and I'd advise anyone who wants to have a say over Chelsea's future at Stamford Bridge to buy a share and get an ability to vote, because naturally there is a lot of concern at the moment, as you would do as a logical fan, of looking at this ownership and going, for a variety of reasons, I do not want to trust them with the development of a new stadium. Even if I like the idea of Earls Court, even if a new stadium could bring this, could bring that, could, alleviate some of the strain maybe on the club. Whatever your kind of reasoning behind thinking a new stadium is a good idea or wanting to redevelop Stamford Bridge, why would you give this ownership that project? Because they can't even get a front of shirt sponsor over the line currently. So, and that's just one of the problems they currently have. We've talked about others before. So the CPO is a big part of this, because there is a massive history lesson here. I'll link it down below. I did a massive piece about the Ken Bates story with Matthew Harding, which is eerily similar now in some ways to what's going on. Another battle of the bridge between, two very rich people. But in the sense of why the CPO was initially created was to safeguard Stamford Bridge, was to safeguard Chelsea in their spiritual home. And the CPO and Chelsea fans do not want, especially at this time when they look at this ownership, for Chelsea to be moved potentially to a home without that protection, to be taken out of Stamford Bridge. And I think until the resolution is found, and for me, I feel like the only way people would vote, fans, CPO members would vote for any change, is for the CPO, effectively the current agreement at Stamford Bridge, to be moved to a new stadium, and even redevelopment of Stamford Bridge. I think there are major concerns about that. So that is why I think there are so many reasons, but that is, I think, a fundamental reason why there is a deadlock here. And I think you can understand why people don't trust the current ownership. And I think Matt Law brought up this point on the London is Blue pod, and I think he was quoting someone else that he'd seen on social media say this. Why should fans trust the new ownership when they don't even trust themselves? They don't even trust who has the best interest of the club at heart. They don't even agree on what to disagree on currently. Give these people the power to oversee one of the biggest changes in Chelsea history. So I completely understand that, and even if it's something that has been a circle and it feels like a never-ending conversation I've had for a number of years now, it's unfortunately a sad and brutal reality of the current nature, because it is a problem that precedes this ownership. I'm not just saying this ownership is the reason Stamford Bridge and the redevelopment of the stadium hasn't gone forward. It's not my point, because obviously this issue has been a headache for the Roman Abramovich tenure, and it has been now for Clearlake and Bowley, right? And I think it will continue to be. So I want to hear your thoughts. I would say, again, to people who get frustrated about maybe fans who are cautious about leaving Stamford Bridge, what you have to do, learn about the CPO, learn about why it exists in the first place, but then also become a member to be able to vote in a potential future vote over this stadium. If you want to have your voice heard, that's the way to do it. If you just want to complain and smear and have a go at fans and talk about how stupid the CPO is, you're not going to get that far, are you? And you're not going to be able to have your say on this. And it's not limited to people within the UK. You can buy a share and have your say as well. So those are my thoughts. Please let me know yours in the comments below, and I will see you again very soon. All the best.